I'm Samantha, 32 years old, and I've been dating David for 3 years. We sat in his silver BMW outside my apartment, staring at an invitation to dinner with his family. "They're going to love you," he said with that charming smile. But the address was for Romano's, the most expensive restaurant in the city. I could have told him right then that I had $6 million sitting in my trust fund. I could have mentioned that my great-aunt left me an inheritance that made his family's wealth look quaint. Instead, I tucked my hair behind my ear and played the part of the nervous girlfriend. What if they think I'm not good enough? Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt nervous about meeting your partner's family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. See, I'd learned the hard way that money changes everything. My last boyfriend suddenly became very interested in marriage the moment he discovered my bank account. The one before that started planning our future around trips I could fund. So when I met David at that little coffee shop downtown, I made a decision. I would be Samantha the marketing coordinator, not Samantha the millionaire heiress. David fell in love with a woman who packed her own lunches and shopped at Target. He insisted on paying for everything because he thought I was struggling. Those weekend getaways, fancy dinners, even my apartment upgrades. He covered it all because he was being a gentleman. And honestly, I loved feeling cared for without ulterior motives. But meeting his family meant entering their world. And their world had rules I knew too well. Old money families could sniff out what they called gold diggers from miles away. They had tests, subtle and not so subtle ways of determining your worth. I decided to give them exactly what they expected. I spent the afternoon shopping at discount stores, buying a dress that screamed trying too hard on a budget. The navy blue polyester blend was exactly wrong for Romano's. Too casual, too cheap, too obvious. I paired it with shoes that pinched my feet and a purse I'd grabbed from a thrift shop. The transformation was complete when I looked in my bathroom mirror that evening. Gone was the confident woman who could buy and sell half the restaurant. In her place stood someone desperate to impress. Someone who clearly didn't belong in their sophisticated circle. David picked me up at 7 sharp, his eyes widening when he saw my outfit. "You look beautiful," he said, though I caught the slight hesitation. He was too kind to mention that I looked underdressed for Romano's, but I saw him glance at my shoes twice. "I wanted to look nice for your family," I said, adjusting the cheap earrings I'd bought to complete the look. The drive felt different tonight. David seemed nervous, which was unusual for him. He kept drumming his fingers on the steering wheel at red lights. "So tell me about them again," I prompted, though he'd already described his family countless times. His mother, Margaret, was a retired museum director. His father, Robert, owned a successful law firm. His sister, Jennifer, had married a cardiologist and lived in the suburbs with their 2 kids. "They can be a bit intense," David admitted as we pulled into Romano's valet parking. "They're not used to sharing me." He squeezed my hand. "But once they get to know you, they'll see what I see." The restaurant was exactly as intimidating as I remembered from my previous visits. Crystal chandeliers, mahogany paneling, waiters in crisp white jackets. The maitre d' recognized me immediately, but played his part perfectly when David gave his family name for the reservation. "Right this way, sir." We were led to a corner table where 3 well-dressed people sat waiting. Margaret had silver hair swept into an elegant chignon and wore what I recognized as a Chanel suit. Robert was distinguished in his navy blazer, and Jennifer looked like she'd stepped out of a country club catalog. They stood as we approached, and I watched their eyes take in my appearance. Margaret's smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. Jennifer's gaze lingered on my dress with poorly concealed disappointment. Robert shook David's hand warmly before turning to me with professional courtesy. "You must be Samantha," Margaret said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "David has told us so much about you." Her tone suggested he hadn't told them enough. I slipped into character immediately, letting my voice rise slightly with nerves. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you all. This place is incredible. I've never been somewhere so fancy." I widened my eyes as I looked around, playing up my supposed awe. The family exchanged glances that they thought I didn't notice. Jennifer's lips twitched with what might have been amusement or superiority. "Romano's is one of our favorite spots," she said smoothly. "We thought it would be nice for a special occasion." David pulled out my chair, and I made a small production of being impressed by the gesture. "Such a gentleman," I gushed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I caught Margaret's slight wince at my volume. As we settled in, the waiter appeared with menus bound in leather. I held mine like it might bite me, squinting at the prices. "Oh my," I whispered, not quite sotto voce. "These are quite expensive." "Don't worry about that," Robert said kindly, though I noticed how his jaw tightened. "This is our treat tonight. David reached for my hand across the table. I told you not to worry about the cost, sweetheart. I let my eyes well up slightly with gratitude. You're also generous. I just want to make a good impression. My voice wavered just enough to suggest overwhelming emotion at their kindness. Margaret leaned forward with what I'm sure she thought was motherly warmth. Tell us about yourself, dear. David mentioned you work in marketing? Oh yes, at Henderson & Associates downtown. It's not anything glamorous, just coordinating campaigns for local businesses. I ducked my head modestly. David says I'm good at it, but honestly, some days I wonder if I'm smart enough for the business world. The family's expressions grew more relaxed as I painted myself as harmless and slightly dim. Jennifer actually smiled for the first time since we'd arrived. Have you ever had to bite your tongue during a family dinner? Sometimes staying quiet is the smartest play. As the evening progressed, the family's true colors began to show. Margaret ordered wine without asking my preference, choosing a bottle that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. When the sommelier poured my glass, she commented, "This is a particularly good vintage. Very smooth for someone not used to quality wines." I sipped it carefully, pretending to be intimidated by its complexity. "It's very nice," I said uncertainly. "Much fancier than what I usually drink." Jennifer laughed, a tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. "What do you usually drink, if you don't mind me asking?" "Oh, whatever's on sale at the grocery store," I replied, with manufactured embarrassment. "David keeps trying to educate my palate, but I think I'm hopeless." David squeezed my hand supportively, clearly uncomfortable with his family's direction, but unsure how to intervene without seeming rude. I could see the conflict in his eyes, torn between loyalty to family and protection of me. Robert cleared his throat. "And where did you go to college, Samantha?" "State University," I answered quickly. Nothing fancy like David's education. I was just happy to graduate without too much debt. I paused dramatically. Well, some debt, but David's been so helpful with career advice. The implication hung in the air, that David was essentially supporting my modest lifestyle. Margaret's smile grew more patronizing by the minute. "How wonderful that you're so grounded in reality." When our appetizers arrived, I made a show of being unsure which fork to use, glancing nervously at David for guidance. Jennifer noticed immediately. "The smaller fork is for the salad," she said with exaggerated patience, as if speaking to a child. "Thank you," I breathed gratefully. I never know these things. My family didn't really do formal dinners. The conversation turned to topics clearly designed to highlight our differences. Expensive vacations they'd taken, charity galas they attended, people they knew in high society. I played my part perfectly, asking naive questions and appearing impressed by their worldliness. Halfway through dinner, Margaret's carefully maintained civility began to crack. "David tells us you've been dating for 3 years, she said, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon. "That's quite serious." "It feels serious to me," I replied, glancing at David adoringly. "I never thought someone like him would be interested in someone like me." "Someone like you?" Robert prompted. I gestured vaguely at myself. Ordinary. David could have anyone, someone from a good family, someone with connections. I lowered my voice conspirationally. "Sometimes I worry I'm holding him back." Jennifer pounced on the opening. "What do you mean by that?" I bit my lip, appearing to struggle with confession. "Well, David has such important work friends, and they have these events I can't really afford to attend. Nice clothes, donations to their causes. It's all so expensive." I touched David's arm. He's always offering to help, but I could never accept that much from him. Margaret's expression shifted to something resembling pity, mixed with calculation. "That must be difficult for you both. I try not to let it bother me," I said bravely. "David says love is more important than money, and I have to trust him on that." I took a shaky breath. Even if his friends sometimes look at me like I don't belong. The family exchanged another round of meaningful glances. I could practically see the gears turning in their heads. Poor David, trapped by sentiment with someone who would never fit into their world. Robert leaned back in his chair. "David's always been too kind for his own good. Generous to a fault." The comment was clearly meant to be a warning disguised as an observation. David's hand tightened around mine, and I could see anger flashing in his eyes. But before he could speak, I jumped in with wide-eyed gratitude. He really is the most generous person I've ever met. I don't know what I did to deserve him. The self-deprecation seemed to satisfy them, confirming their assumptions about my place in the relationship hierarchy. As we approached dessert, Margaret made her move. "Samantha, dear, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I feel I should mention something." David tensed beside me. "Mom." She held up a perfectly manicured hand. David, this is important. She turned to me with what she probably thought was kindness. My dear, David comes from a very specific background. His future involves certain expectations, certain responsibilities. I widened my eyes innocently. What do you mean? Jennifer jumped in to help deliver the blow. What Mother means is that David will likely be expected to marry someone who can complement his lifestyle, someone who understands the social obligations that come with his position. I let my face fall dramatically. Oh, I see. I glanced at David, who looked furious. I hadn't really thought about it that way. We're not saying anything against you personally, Robert added quickly. You seem like a lovely girl, but sometimes love isn't enough to bridge certain gaps. The word gaps hung in the air like a poison cloud. I could feel David preparing to explode in my defense, but I squeezed his hand under the table. This was my moment to let them reveal exactly who they were. I appreciate your honesty, I said quietly, my voice trembling just enough to suggest devastation masked by dignity. I suppose I always knew this might be an issue. Margaret's expression softened with what she probably thought was compassion. You're taking this very well, dear. It shows real maturity. I just want David to be happy, I whispered, playing the role of the noble girlfriend willing to sacrifice for love. Even if that means... I let the sentence trail off meaningfully, watching as satisfaction crept across their faces. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd successfully convinced the poor, naive girl to step aside for their son's greater good. David had gone completely still beside me, his jaw clenched so tightly I worried about his dental work. But he stayed silent, probably shocked by his family's cruelty and my apparent acceptance of it. As the waiter cleared our main courses, I excused myself to the restroom. It was time for the final act, and I needed a moment to prepare for the revelation that would change everything. I stood in the restroom mirror, touching up my deliberately cheap lipstick, and preparing for what would either be the most satisfying moment of my life or a complete disaster. The bathroom attendant, Maria, had worked at Romano's for years and recognized me immediately. "Miss Samantha," she whispered in accented English, "you look different tonight." I smiled at her reflection. "Sometimes we all need to play dress-up, Maria." She nodded knowingly. "Mr. Romano, he will be happy to see you. He was just telling the staff how the new expansion is going so well thanks to your investment. Perfect timing." I slipped her a $20 bill. "Could you do me a favor? In about 10 minutes, could you ask Mr. Romano to come greet his guests at table 12? Tell him it's important." When I returned to the table, dessert menus were being distributed. Margaret was in the middle of what sounded like a rehearsed speech about family legacy and appropriate partnerships. David looked like he wanted to crawl under the table or commit murder, possibly both. "Ah, there you are, dear," Margaret said as I sat down. We were just discussing some family traditions that David might not have mentioned. I settled into my chair with renewed confidence. The countdown had begun. "Oh, that sounds fascinating. I love learning about family histories." Jennifer smiled patronizingly. "Well, for instance, there's the matter of the family ring. It's been passed down for 4 generations, always to brides who come from established families. The implication was crystal clear. I would never be worthy of wearing their precious heirloom." David's knuckles were white where he gripped his water glass. "That sounds like a beautiful tradition," I said sweetly. "I'm sure whoever David chooses to marry will be honored to wear it." Margaret beamed at my apparent acceptance of exclusion. "Exactly. I'm so glad you understand these things matter. What do you think will happen when they discover who Samantha really is? Drop your predictions in the comments below." Robert decided to twist the knife a little deeper. "There's also the matter of social expectations. David's career involves a lot of networking, charity events, business dinners. It's important that his partner can navigate those waters successfully." I nodded earnestly. "I can imagine how challenging that must be. All those important people to impress." "Precisely," Margaret said, warming to her theme. "Take tonight, for instance. Romano's isn't just a restaurant, it's an institution. The kind of place where business deals are made, where reputations are built or broken. Someone unfamiliar with this world might find it overwhelming." David finally found his voice. "Mom, that's enough." "Darling, I'm just explaining the realities," she replied smoothly. "Samantha seems intelligent enough to understand." I leaned forward with wide-eyed curiosity. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Patterson. I had no idea places like this were so important for business. David never told me about the networking aspect." Jennifer laughed. "Oh, David's always been too modest. But really, the connections made in places like Romano's can make or break careers. The owner, Mr. Romano, knows everyone who matters in this city." "How fascinating," I breathed. "He must be incredibly successful to run such an exclusive establishment." "Indeed," Robert said proudly. Franco Romano built this empire from nothing. Started with a small family restaurant and expanded through careful investments and smart partnerships. A real self-made success story. Margaret nodded approvingly. The kind of man who understands the value of choosing the right associates. I could see David struggling with whether to defend me or simply escape this nightmare dinner. His loyalty was touching, but I needed him to wait just a few more minutes. The pieces were falling into place perfectly. It must take real vision to build something like this, I said admiringly. And I imagine he's very careful about who he trusts with his business investments. The family exchanged satisfied glances, apparently pleased that I was finally grasping the importance of their social circle and my exclusion from it. As if summoned by destiny, Franco Romano appeared at our table just as the dessert course arrived. He was exactly as I remembered. Distinguished silver hair, immaculate suit, commanding presence that spoke of quiet confidence and old-world charm. "Good evening," he said warmly, his slight Italian accent adding elegance to every word. "I hope you are all enjoying your dinner this evening." Margaret practically preened. "Franco, how wonderful to see you. Everything has been absolutely perfect as always." He smiled graciously. "Mrs. Patterson is always a pleasure. And Mr. Patterson, good to see you again." His eyes moved around the table politely until they landed on me. I watched as recognition dawned in his expression, followed immediately by surprise at my appearance. Franco Romano was nothing if not discreet, but I could see him taking in my cheap dress and obvious disguise with sharp intelligence. "And this lovely young lady must be a new friend," he said carefully. David straightened with pride. "Franco, I'd like you to meet my girlfriend, Samantha. Samantha, this is Franco Romano, the owner." I extended my hand with apparent nervousness. "Mr. Romano, it's such an honor. I've never been anywhere so elegant." Franco took my hand, and I felt him squeeze it gently, a private acknowledgement of our shared secret. "The pleasure is entirely mine, Miss Mitchell," I supplied. "Samantha Mitchell." His eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. "Mitchell, such a beautiful name." He paused, studying my face with theatrical consideration. "You know, you remind me of someone. Have we met before?" Margaret laughed dismissively. "I doubt that, Franco. Samantha doesn't usually frequent establishments like yours." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Franco's expression cooled slightly as he registered the insult. "Is that so?" he said quietly. I could feel the tension building like electricity before a thunderstorm. Franco was giving me the opportunity to control this revelation, and I intended to make the most of it. "I don't think we've been formally introduced," I said carefully. "Though you do seem familiar." Franco smiled slowly. "Perhaps you've seen my photograph in the business section. I've been featured recently in several articles about successful restaurant expansions." David looked confused. "Expansions?" "Oh, yes," Franco said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Romano's has been expanding quite aggressively this past year. 3 new locations, thanks to some very generous investors who believe in our vision." Margaret's smile was becoming strained. "How wonderful. It's always nice when people support local businesses." "Indeed," Franco agreed. "Though I must say, some of our investors have been far more generous than others. In fact, our primary investor made it possible for us to survive the pandemic and come back stronger than ever." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. "That's quite a success story." Franco nodded gravely. "This person didn't just provide capital. They provided guidance, connections, and most importantly, trust when banks were unwilling to take risks on restaurant expansion." I could see David trying to piece together why Franco was sharing so much detail about his business dealings with strangers. Margaret was clearly growing impatient with the conversation. "Well, that's lovely," she said dismissively. "Samantha, dear, perhaps we should order dessert and let Mr. Romano return to his other guests." Franco's smile turned razor sharp. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, I was hoping to have a private word with Miss Mitchell, if that would be acceptable." The entire table went silent. David looked bewildered. Margaret's face showed the first crack in her composure. "I'm sorry," Margaret said faintly. "You see," Franco continued conversationally, "I make it a point to personally thank our most important investors when they honor us with their presence." The words hit the table like a bomb. David's face went through a fascinating series of expressions. Confusion, realization, shock, and finally something that looked like pride mixed with awe. Margaret's mouth actually fell open. Jennifer made a strangled sound. Robert just stared. "I'm sorry," Margaret said weakly. "Did you say investor?" Franco's smile was pure theater. "Oh yes. Miss Mitchell here is responsible for the loan that kept Romano's doors open during our darkest hour. Without her faith in our vision, none of this," he gestured around the elegant restaurant, "would exist today." I stood slowly, my cheap polyester dress suddenly feeling like armor instead of a costume. "Thank you for your discretion, Mr. Romano. I wasn't sure you'd recognize me without my usual business attire." David rose beside me, his expression a mixture of amazement and something deeper, respect. "Samantha, what's happening here?" I turned to face the table of people who had spent the evening trying to convince me I wasn't good enough for their family. My voice was calm, steady, and completely different from the nervous girl who had sat down 3 hours earlier. "What's happening, David, is that your family has spent the entire evening trying to convince me that I don't belong in your world." I paused, letting my eyes move from Margaret to Jennifer to Robert. "The irony is quite delicious, actually." Margaret found her voice. "I don't understand." "No," I agreed pleasantly. "You really don't." I turned to Franco. "Mr. Romano, would you mind clarifying for them exactly what my investment in Romano's entails?" Franco was clearly enjoying himself. Miss Mitchell owns 40% of Romano's enterprise, including our 3 locations and the catering business. She's also the primary stakeholder in our real estate holdings. He paused dramatically. "In layman's terms, she's my business partner." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer was the first to recover. But you said you worked in marketing." I smiled. "I do. I own Mitchell Marketing and Investment Solutions. We specialize in helping small businesses expand through strategic partnerships and targeted growth campaigns." David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Samantha, why didn't you tell me?" I reached for his hand, and for the first time all evening, my smile was completely genuine. "Because I needed to know that you loved me for who I am, not what I have. And tonight proved that you do." I turned back to his family, who were still sitting in stunned silence. "As for the rest of you, let me be clear about something. David is an incredible man who deserves a family that supports him unconditionally. What he got instead was a family so concerned with status and appearances that you were willing to break his heart to maintain your social standing." Margaret's face had gone pale. "Samantha, we had no idea." "No," I interrupted firmly. "You had no idea because you made assumptions based on superficial appearances. You saw a cheap dress and decided I was inferior. You heard State University and dismissed my intelligence. You assumed financial dependence and treated me like a gold digger." Franco cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should mention that Miss Mitchell graduated summa cum laude with degrees in both business and marketing and built her company from the ground up after inheriting startup capital from her great-aunt." Robert was beginning to look physically ill. "Samantha, we sincerely apologize. We clearly misjudged." "You didn't misjudge anything," I said calmly. "You revealed exactly who you are. People who measure worth by bank accounts and pedigree. People who think kindness and love are secondary to social status." David squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea they would." "David, you have nothing to apologize for. You defended me all evening. You were horrified by their behavior." I looked around the table one more time. "The question now is whether you want to build a life with someone whose family will always see me as beneath them, or whether you're ready to establish some serious boundaries." Margaret was practically trembling. "Of course we want to build a relationship with you. We simply—" "No," I said firmly. "That ship has sailed. You've shown me who you are when you think someone is powerless. That's not something I'm interested in forgetting." Franco stepped forward. "Miss Mitchell, your table is ready in the private dining room whenever you'd like to continue your evening in more comfortable surroundings." I looked at David. "What do you say? Ready to start fresh?" He stood, pulling me close. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. As we walked away from the table, I heard Jennifer whisper urgently to her mother. "Do you realize what we've just done?" Yes, I thought with satisfaction. They were beginning to understand exactly what they'd done. And more importantly, they were learning that respect isn't something you can withdraw and restore at will. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life drama about standing up for yourself and finding your worth. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being successful enough that their opinions